What's up, friends? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy time zone. Welcome to another stream on Identity Crisis. This is our Learn module. So today we're going to be covering app registrations. I hope everyone's well. As you can see, I'm driving solo for one more time. JP is otherwise busy, so I am taking the honors of driving this for a few more days, and then we'll be back to our normal schedule. So bear with me while I try to get you through these. So today we're going to be talking about app registrations, and there's not really much to cover here. If you have been following our Identity Crisis series, we went from the very beginnings of identity and what is identity, and slowly we progressed the stream to cover tokens, to cover flows, to cover protocols. And now we're getting into the specifics of the Microsoft identity. Now that we covered all the general information about what is identity, thank you, BST guy. Mission complete. Thank you very much. Yes, we did it. We're ready to ship it. Now I know what my settings need to be. So for next time, you won't have to bear with me spending 5 minutes sorting out my audio settings. Identity. It's a mess. It's a mess. And hopefully over the past few weeks, we managed to demystify quite a few of the notions of identity, quite a few of the terminology. There is a lot of esoteric language in identity, and hopefully we are at the point now that you guys can follow along. So last week, we spun up our tenant. We spun up Azure tenants, and we saw different ways of getting there. So if you missed that episode, make sure to catch it on YouTube. aka.ms/45 so /YouTube. So let me put it on the chat. We have a dedicated Identity Crisis series there, which means that you can go and 45 so not crisis. That means you can go and catch up everything from the beginning. It is YouTube. There you go. And today I'm going to actually tell you how, or at least when it comes to implementing identity for your solutions, what is the first part that you need to do to make it work? There are two main parts when it comes to authenticating with a Microsoft Identity Platform within your apps. The first part is going into your Azure AD tenant. As you can see, I have it open over here, and registering an app. That app is very similar to app registrations that you might have done in the past if you had to work with Facebook or Twitter or Google or any other service that provides identity. So if you wanted to directly sign in with Google, you have to go into the portal. There's a developer portal usually for these services where you go and register your intent. Very similar to those services, the Azure Active Directory and B2C, business to consumer, offer you the ability to go and register an application to show your intent. And you do this by going into the portal, the Azure AD portal, aad.portal.azure.com, or via the Azure portal, portal.azure.com, and then clicking on the Azure AD blade or service, and it takes you to the root. So this is where you get the overview of your portal and your Azure AD with all the information and what you can interact with. And we're mainly interested in the app registration. Most of the developers will probably spend time playing with app registrations. There's a slight possibility that you might go into enterprise applications, and we'll talk about that a little bit once we cover the main topics of the app registrations and where the enterprise applications sit. What does it mean? But in most cases, you're going to be spending most of your time in the app registrations. And as you can see here, I have quite a few app registrations. Important note, we try to clarify and probably iterate that every chance we get. But if you are building, the second part of building identity systems is once you do your app registration, you need to use a library to go and implement the code. And up until this point, we had two libraries. I think we still have two libraries, so it's not up until this point. Up until June 30th, 2022, you will not be able to use ADAL, our older library. And the recommendation, even today, if you're building apps, is to use MSAL. So if you have older solutions that use ADAL, please be aware that it's going to go away in a year and a half, in a year and 3 months. So make sure, that that you go and remove that dependency and you move your applications to MSOL. Please, Sean, do not recommend these things, not even as a joke. So Sean is saying, is it safe to go and create a service principal and having it as an owner on the subscription? And no, it's not. I mean, you could, and I've seen people doing it in the past. I think by default, if you do Azure AD SP create for RBAC, it will create it with contributor rights, not owner rights. But please don't do that. Service accounts should be as limited as possible in terms of permissions. And ideally, if you can have an account that also signs in with, contributor rights, for example, rather than full-blown owner rights, sometimes it's better. And for those of you that use Azure quite a bit and you might be creating and deleting resources, using locks is also something extremely useful. Policies and locks, when you create resources, enforce policies, and when you're deleting resources, having locks is ideal, because I know people that have deleted stuff in the past. Oh, there's a white glow over here on that side, which is weird. I think it's coming from the light. Apparently we have sun. I'm not used to the sun, so this is now reflecting on my green screen. Okay, that's a cool effect, isn't it? I wonder if we could do something else. Yes, the whole point of service principals is to have limited scopes, but you're jumping the gun here, Sean. We're still talking about operating stations. We haven't covered service principals, but we will do that very, very soon. So operating stations are you coming into the portal and showing your intent. Don't apologize, it's fine. It's part of the conversation. I just don't want to confuse people, because we started talking about operating stations and suddenly we switched to service principals, and if they're following along, they're like, what the hell is a service principal? Why do I need to know about that? Okay, let's go and create a new op registration, because there's no better way of showing things rather than doing them. The first thing you need to provide is a name, some kind of name, any name, it doesn't matter. Make it meaningful and make it in a way that maps to your application. So if you're creating, say, a Blazor app, for example, so Blazor web front end, something like that. You can also have spaces, so you can say Blazor web front end. This is mainly an identifier. It's not used for anything in the code usually. So make it meaningful and make it easy to find and identify. Then next, you need to decide what kind of supported types you're going to have. Now, we haven't talked about single tenancy and multi-tenancy yet, but if you're creating applications with Azure Active Directory, it is usually for line of business application, for enterprise solutions, for your developers, for your employees, or for staff, or for anyone that works in your organization. So at Microsoft, anyone that has at Microsoft.com address, and if I create this one, they will be able to sign in. You can also create a multi-tenant app registration, which means that I can create my app registration, and then if let's say I had something like Office or Azure DevOps, then other organizations can also sign in to that application, and that will create a service principal, it will create a copy, it will create an enterprise application in their tenant where they can manage the permissions themselves. We will cover that in a very the second part of the identity crisis episode today. But for now, we're focusing on my organization. I want to only allow people from my organization. Now, you'll also notice that we added the ability to also use your MSA account, your Microsoft account, if you want to sign in with your @Live or @Hotmail or @Outlook. Does anyone have a Hotmail account yet? I changed mine to Outlook because I thought it was cool, and now I regret my choice because it would have been cooler having the Hotmail address. Decisions, you know. And then finally, you can also enforce personal Microsoft accounts only. So if you only want MSA, you have a Hotmail, Stefan? Nice, man. See, I don't know why I thought it would be cool to move to Outlook. In fact, I was like, I want to get my Outlook now, and I did it, and now I regret it so bad. Must be a badge of honor having an Outlook or a Hotmail or Live predated the Hotmail, didn't it? Okay, everyone is cool here apart from me. Apparently, Sean also has his Hotmail account. Fine. You should have kept your Hotmail as a second Hotmail. I know. But then again, how many emails am I going to use and have? I'm trying to move away from my Gmail as well to just use Outlook these days. Okay, redirect URI. Usually you can leave this blank if you don't know what you're doing. There are options. There's a drop down, so you can say I might want to create a public client or a web app or a single page app. But usually I know most people will skip it and then they will configure that later on. We'll see how you can configure these things. So we have the information we need. In fact, we'll go back and say just my organization. So single tenant, multi-tenant, multi-tenant, and MSA only. Okay, there you go. It's super fast, very, very quick. Some important information up here. You get a display name, the client ID or application ID. Usually most of the code that we have references that as client ID. So just make sure you can easily copy that from the clipboard. The tenant ID is what identifies your specific tenant. If you're using a test tenant like I am cmatchcast.onmicrosoft.com. I am not cool enough to have my own custom domain. You can add your own custom domain if you want to. But I'm a cheapskate, so I just went with the defaults. I know JP has his own custom domain to look cool. So that domain name also corresponds to that. So sometimes when you say point to a specific tenant, we talked about tenants last week, in your code, you can use either the full domain name or you can use the GUI. And in code, you usually have to pass the tenant ID somewhere. So this is where you get it from. The object ID is the object ID of our app registration, which is different to the application ID. And then it says what it supports, what are the direct URIs, and there are links to take you easily there. So with that, what we are going to do now is we can do quick starts, which is a fantastic way to get started. So I'm going to show you, should we do quick starts or should we do the standard way? Let's do quick starts. Okay, so I am very new to identity. I have no idea what I'm doing. So now I need to implement that. And I can come into my quick start, which is up here. I know that not many people have seen this in action. So the quick start actually allows you to quickly edit, configure, and download a sample with your settings so you can get off the ground super quickly. What does that mean? Let's say I want to create a single page application and it's nice here because it gives us some examples. We added React, we have Angular, then we have Blazor WebAssembly, since it is a front-end framework. And we have JavaScript authentication code flow and JavaScript implicit flows. We talked about flows 2 episodes ago. So ideally, you don't want to stick with implicit. You want to move to auth code flow with Pixie support. So we're going to use this one as an example to drive the experience. So let's say, again, I don't know much about JavaScript. That's not a lie. That's true. And here it says you will need an Azure subscription, which you already have. You will need Node.js, which I have installed on my machine. And you need Visual Studio Code or another code editor. It doesn't have to be Visual Studio Code. And you can quickly go and download them from the links here. Now, the next thing it's going to do, it's going to make changes to the app registration for me. And it's going to add the redirect URI. This redirect URI is where my ID token will be returned once I successfully sign in. So in my application, I will run my JavaScript app. I will get redirected, or a pop-up will be presented to me to sign in. That will take me to Azure AD to sign in. And then once I successfully sign in, it will return my ID token back to this redirect URI. This needs to match my app settings. So if my Node application was running at port 5000 or 3007, then that redirect URI would need to match. That also protects you from getting your token passed around, because it can only come back to one specific redirect URI that you have configured, or the ones that you have configured, because we'll see how we can change that. And that's the minimum change that we have to do. So let's make the update. And at this point, we're ready to go and download the sample. So let's go download the sample. It will come down here. So let's open this one. Let me copy it to my projects. And I already have one here, but it's fine. We can overwrite that. Paste. Replace the files. All of them. Wipe them out. And why did they make the search so big here? I want the search so big. There you go. You can actually open the command line from there. And now I'm going to do code. So I'm going to open code in that specific directory just to see what we got inside our solution. Ha! See, this is a black theme for some weird reason. So I changed to the white theme, and it's black here, black in the terminal, because obviously the terminal is black, and I think my PowerShell is set up to black. Hey, Bruce Lane, how you doing, buddy? Thanks for joining us. We're talking about app registrations, and we just went through the, what did we go through? We went through the registering an app using the shortcut. We're using the fast, what was it? What do we call it? Quick starts. Yes, using the quick starts. A lot of code over here. You can ignore 90% of what's there. The important bit is the server.js, which tells us that we're running on port 3000, which is the default for Node. But apparently in other samples that we do, we use different ports just to confuse people. So we have this port, which, remember, it matches the redirect URI that we just configured in our app registration. And then there are two files that are very pertinent or very specific to identity. Inside our app, we have, let me make this bigger. Inside our app, we have the Auth Config. Now, this is where we pass the information that will tell our authentication code, the MSAL library, where to go to sign in. Remember, you can have multi-tenant apps and single-tenant apps. This is a single tenant, so we need to tell which tenant we're going to use. So if I put this on the side, and if I bring up our app registration, if I go to our overview, let's see what we have here. Let's hide the files. Client ID. Remember, we talked about the client ID? These two match. So that's great. That's a good start. I did not start from a repo. We started directly from the portal, and I did the Azure app for Quick Start. Yes. So no GitHub Quick Starts. Just going through app registrations, what they are, and why should you use them. So here you are. You have your MSAL config with the client ID. We have the the authority. It says login Microsoft.com, but it points to my tenant. And remember, we talked about that. So B55F is my B55F. So that's my authority. So the code knows where to point stuff. And then the redirect URI, which needs to match the redirect URI that we have configured here, which is under authentication. Kaboom. Lovely. So here we are. These two match. There are some settings about the cache where the cookie is going to end up and how it is going to be shared, or if it's going to be shared across my tabs on my browser and my sessions. And then the other file that is important to us, it's the auth pop-up. Now the sample is fantastic because it offers you two different options. It offers you a pop-up and a redirect. Now some browsers do have issues with pop-ups. Therefore, you need to look into whether your solution will need to use a redirect or a pop-up if you get stuck. I think Safari Mobile, for example, may have some issues. So if you are building mobile apps, or if your app is going to be used in a mobile app, then be aware that you may have to do a redirect if that's your target audience. So here, we're gonna default to the pop-up because that's what the recommended way is. So a pop-up. And then let me close this one down. There is not much code in there's more code to configure the UI than is to run the app. So the very first thing that you have to do is actually get an MSAL client. So we're instantiating our MSAL object. This is the library that will do the authentication, the sign in and the sign out. The select account is once we have signed in, we need to select an account, so we'll skip that one. The handle response is what happens once we sign in, and that's for changing the UI in effect. So let's go, sign in, right? Let's remove the comments because there's way too much stuff here. As you can see, it's literally 3 lines of code and catching the error. So we present the login pop-up to the user. and then we handle the response, and then we either handle the response and change the UI to reflect that, or we throw an error message, like you try to sign into the wrong tenant, or your account does not have permissions to go there, or something else happened, or misconfiguration. And then for the logout or the sign out, it's even less code. For the logout requests, you just say msal get account and then just call the logout. I mean, it is literally 10 lines of code to do a sign in and sign out. And as I said, everything else here is either for changing the UI or for getting access tokens for accessing the graph, because most of our samples tend to call the graph as well to show you a little bit of an end-to-end scenario. Okay, I don't want to show too much code because next week we'll be implementing these things. So I just wanted to show you that if you've never used app registrations before, then using the quick start, if you're using the quick starts, then you get everything or most of the stuff that you need. Now, there might be a case where you say, I don't want to use the quick start. I just want to come and implement something. So here again, we know that we're only supporting a single tenant. You know, so that we actually have the ability now to change to a multi-tenanted app, but we cannot change to MSA support. So we cannot support Microsoft accounts if we wanted to. But let's say we created that and we didn't use the quick start. Now we can come and add the platform. And these are the applications that we can support, which in effect is everything. We have web. That means anything that runs on the server. ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET older stuff. Can I say older stuff? Or am I going to be banned? Sorry, where did you go in the Azure portal to create this? Oh, easy peasy, right? If I go to home, that's the root. Then I go into Azure Active Directory. And then inside the app registrations, for those ones that have just joined, or for Bruce, then you find your, which one how did we name ours? I can't remember what we named ours. What was it? You know, we can, what did we name ours? Was it like Blazor something? Blazor demo? Or, you know what? Let's go and create a new one. It doesn't matter. So learn module tests. So we're back to where we started. Yes, Azure AD app registrations. So here we did the quick start. Now we're not using the quick start method anymore, which is a fantastic way to get you started and get all the code wired up for you, so you can press F5 or npm start and we'll do it for you. But now we're going the different route, which is using the ad platform. So in the ad platform, we show you the different options that you have. Yeah, no worries, Bruce. So we have web, which is anything that runs on the server, Java, Kotlin, Python, anything that is serving from a server. Single page apps is anything that is running on the client. Any JavaScript framework, more or less, or Blazor that runs, or Blazor WebAssembly, or WebAssembly, anything that can produce WebAssembly that runs on the browser, it's technically a single page app. And MSAL browser is the main library, but we also give you libraries for React and Angular. I wish we had one for Vue. Maybe if you guys upvote the Vue library, we can get a Vue one as well. If not, we do have a sample that shows you how to integrate MSAL with Vue, which is great. And then we have mobile and desktop applications. So this may get a little bit confusing now. So we have Objective-C, Swift, and Xamarin. This is for iOS. So you can build directly with the native languages, Objective and Swift, or you can use Xamarin. I don't know where React Native falls here. I don't know if anyone has done anything with React Native, but I would guess that React Native probably falls into the realm of single page apps, so MSAL browser. Then we have Android. You can use Java. You can use Kotlin, which is a new way. And then you can use Xamarin. Xamarin, again, allows you to write once and deploy to multiple places, which is great. And then down here, you also have mobile and desktop applications. So here we have Windows, UWP, console, any console app on any language. We have IoT. We have limited devices. I don't know what a limited device is. Maybe somebody else can tell me, but I haven't done anything with limited devices yet. And classic iOS and Android. So there you have it. And for all these, we have the corresponding libraries to allow you to go and build stuff. So for web, let's say we are going to use .NET Core for this example, then you need to pass a redirect URI. And because React is a SPA, well, React Native is the one that, so I know there's React JS, and then there's React Native that allows you to build for mobile and desktop. So I don't know what you would use there. I think it's still JavaScript, so probably MSL browser. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so since we're doing .NET, the default port is HTTPS localhost, and then 5001. React Native is JS. Yes. Okay. I haven't done any development with React Native. I would be keen to see how it integrates with. Are people still using React Native? Flutter, for example, I think it's super big these days for mobile development. Xamarin is super big, and then obviously Swift, Kotlin, and the latest frameworks for native deployment if you want to. Oh, Ionic React. Is Ionic the same as Cordova? So a point of order, a question call in, does this mean that there has to be a separate operating system for every client platform? I know there's, so if I have to build two web and then build two iOS, I'm creating two different operating systems. The recommendation is yes. Yes. I would keep things clean because you might have different permissions and different implementations per client app. So the recommendation is they use different operating systems for different platforms and different clients. Okay. It used to be Cordova. Now they've created Capacitor for native plugins. Man, and you have to use VS Code for that, right? Because I remember there was support for Visual Studio to build Cordova, but we moved it to VS Code. We're using a different tool, Bruce. Okay, we have the redirect URI, but this will not work for .NET Core because in .NET Core we also expect OIDs, what is it? Sign in. What is it? OIDC sign in? I can't remember. Can you believe that? Of course I can't remember. Let's open a recent one. File, open recent. Graph team, is that the one that we did yesterday? That was the one we did yesterday. Don't save, it's fine. See, I can't remember. It's early in the morning, I need more coffee. It's sign in OIDC. There you go. JP would be ashamed of me now, not remembering that on the top of my head. There you go, sign in OIDC. We talked about flows, and we talked about why you should not be using implicit grant. So we don't have to use implicit grant with .NET Core if we don't want to. There's a setting in the startup.cs that can switch the MSAL library and the Microsoft Addendum Web library to use authorization code with Pixie. So that is there, and then I can just press configure. So now you can see that we have our redirect URIs. But you can also see that we have multiple add URIs. So if I were to test this app in multiple environments, my local environment is localhost, but let's say https test.com, then sign in OIDC, for example, then I could also do that, right? And I can press save. So you can have multiple URIs depending on the environment. Now, there is a school of thought here that you might want to have different operating systems for different environments. But in my experience, in most cases, you will create an operating system, you will set up the permissions and the roles, and then you will propagate that information across multiple environments. So I think it's an overkill to have different operating systems, unless you're doing some testing. And so no more videos picking up the stream inception. Okay. What is VTT? Virtual TT. Oh, you're thinking about your stuff. Okay. So 10.4, don't work for 10 that may have some bearing on naming convention for apps that they're otherwise duplicate. Yeah, I mean, you can say my app does web, my app does Blazor, my app does this mobile or whatever. Okay, so we have the multiple web URIs. Now, yesterday I was asked, why can we not have multiple logout URLs if that's the case? And that was a very valid question. So if I am testing on the local environment, voice to text. If I'm testing on the local environment, then I want to have localhost 5001 for signing in. And then if it was the sign out, it would have been localhost HTTPS localhost 5001. And since it says sign out OIDC. But I cannot do the same for my other environments, which is annoying. And that was the sad realization yesterday. I need to figure out why we don't support multiple logout URLs, but for now, you can only have one. There can only be one. Okay. So multiple, which is fantastic. And then this is how you add the platform. And ideally, you want to keep one platform per app. And down here, you have advanced settings. This is when you use public client flows. So web by default is confidential clients because nobody can mess with your server-side code. Yeah, exactly. See, there can only be one. I need some to get my Stream Deck to get some soundboard settings there. Although the last time we did that with JP, we got banned, or our video got flagged by YouTube because there was some proprietary copyright issue. So you need to be super careful with the sounds that we play. So down here, you only switch these on if you are planning on using things like mobile apps. Yeah, I know. We had to go and cut the videos out. So yeah, the audio part that had the 15 seconds of silence, I think he was playing the Jeopardy waiting sound. We had to wait for it. There you go. So this is the basic stuff that you'll be doing here. Now, let's see what else is in an app registration. We have clients. Yeah, it's okay. I don't want to save the changes. We have certificates and secrets. If you are going to, if you're in a confidential client, like say a web app, and you need to go and grab tokens, then you can add a secret. That secret can be generated down here. We'll create one now. Please don't dox me. It will add a default name, so you don't have to worry about names, which is fine, unless you want to have very prescriptive names. You can copy the secret from here. Very important, once you navigate away from this page and come back, that code will not be accessible to you. So that value you need to copy to something safe. So here, ideally you want to copy it to a notepad and then add it to your code or straight into your code. Don't copy the ID. They changed the UI recently, so I went, and by default I would always select the last one, and I went for the ID. The ID doesn't do anything. However, if you are going to use secrets, then why not just use a certificate? So you can create a self-signed certificate, or you can have a proper certificate. You can upload it here. Do I have one? I don't think I have any certificates anywhere. So let's see, somewhere in my code projects, do I have? Oh, I do have. Oh, that's my Linux file, so don't want that. But you can easily create a self-signed certificate. You upload the certificate up here, you get a thumbprint. And then as long as the certificate is installed on the target machine and you wire up your library to go and pick up that secret and pass it into the instantiation of the MSAL client, then as long as the certificates match and you have the right thumbprint, it will allow you to authenticate. And certificates are the recommended way because it means that your secrets don't need to be passed around, and you don't have to worry about new members in the team coming, getting the secrets, not storing them correctly, or for things running out, or you're missing your expiration date and what have you. I think there's also a way to integrate with Key Vault, but I haven't tried that. That would be an interesting integration, not here, but in your app. Okay, next, token configuration. This is for adding additional claims and group claims. This is for, in effect, changing the information that gets passed down to your tokens. And you can do it for both ID and access tokens and SAML. So if you are signing in users, it will be the ID token. If you're grabbing access tokens for your apps or additional apps, then you can pass the information here. So this is where you can change the content that you pass down to your tokens, which is great. API permissions. Now we have just created a front end. It makes no sense to have well, it will have API permissions, so you can add more permissions here if you want to. By default, we have the user.read, which is part of the graph. And this is where you get information about the current user if you were to call the me endpoint. But by default, we support OpenID, profile, and offline, which means that we also provide you with a refresh token. So here you can go and add permissions to, say, an API. So if I had an API, okay, let's start from the beginning. You can add permissions. What was the protocol you said you have 1 year or less to change? No, it's not a protocol, it's the secrets. So I go back to secrets. Certificates usually have an expiration date, so you need to be careful about that. And when you create a secret, we always recommend that you set it for 1 year. Do not set your secrets to never. It's better to roll your secrets. But since rolling secrets is something you have to remember and come back, certificates is a lot easier because you ideally have a centralized way of managing your certificates and rolling them out, i.e. Key Vault. So you want to use Key Vault instead of that. And you can automate the process of uploading the Key Vault to Azure AD. No, I did not say anything about SAML. Oh, I thought it was something else, and we are to use SAML. No, man, I didn't say use SAML, please. OpenID Connect and Auth 2. This is where we are today. This is where you should be as well, please. So we talked about API permissions, adding a new permission. By default, we have graph. It's always there when you create a new app registration. You can remove it if you don't want it. And then there are different APIs you can select. Since you're in Azure AD, you have access to everything that the Microsoft ecosystem offers you. So we have Azure, we have Graph. Graph is the gateway to most of your data. You can have Azure Service Management, OneNote, Office 365, Yammer, Skype for Business. Does that even work? Still works. And then you have other Microsoft APIs like Azure Bats and Azure Data Explorer, Azure DevOps. You can get a token to go and interact with your Azure DevOps. You can get access to your Key Vault and manage your Key Vault. And there's a whole slew of information and some legacy APIs. That's the Azure Active Directory Graph. Please don't use that. Everything should be on MS Graph now. However, let's say, so this is where, this is a lot of all the APIs that have been configured. That's my custom ones, and that's everything that has been recorded. So there's some other stuff like call recorder. I don't even know what that is. I haven't done anything with these, so just know that they're there, right? There's more. Load more. More. Give me more. Wow. There's more. How much more? And they're not in an alphabetic order, so that's good luck. But I think you can search, right? Okay, you can search. And then finally, my APIs. This is usually the most important one. So usually Graph or something in Azure, and then you jump straight into my APIs. So as you can see here, every time I create an app registration that is for an API and exposes permissions that I need to consume, they will appear up here. So as you can see, most of them have some kind of an API in the name, which makes it easy to identify. And here you can see I have APIM, backend, protected MVC API. So if I click on this one, it says, well, this specific API exposes some permissions. And if you are going to get an access token in your app to be able to call this API, then you need to select this permission. There could be multiple permissions, by the way. So it doesn't require admin consent, which is great. So I can add that permission now. And off we go. This is brilliant. I guess Skype for Business still works. Somehow it's on my machine and I cannot get rid of it. Sorry, Taylor & Codes. I think our builds have removed it some time ago, so we don't have it anymore. So API permissions are things that allow you to communicate between your one app and the other app. So I have a client app that needs to call an API. This is where I need to come and configure that information. This is where I create this association. So my client app will know and be able to access tokens. And then we have expose an API. So if I were building an API, this is where I come to add my scopes. The scopes I used before for that custom API. this is where I can go and create a similar one. So first it will create an app ID. Now it doesn't have to be like that. It can be my custom API URI. Save and continue. So you can edit that. Doesn't have to be a god awful good. And then here you can say what kind of scope name do you want to give it. Usually most of the samples go with access as user, but you can call it whatever you want. User.access.my.data, right? So here you say who can consent, just the admins, which means the normal users won't be able to consent and provide information, but no, we want everyone to do that. Then this is some kind of a messaging which will appear on the window that the users are presented. Please consent so that I can access your data. And then it's typically copy paste, because I am not careful enough. We want it to be enabled and then adding a scope. So that scope now will appear over here. You can easily copy it from there. And any app that needs to consume that that scope will need to connect to my API like we did before in the API permissions. However, it is slightly uncommon to have a front-end app that also exposes a scope as an API. So you don't need it. We're just doing it for demonstration purposes. Now, app roles. This is for assigning app roles. Custom roles assign permissions to users and apps. There is roles and administrators down here. So this is still in preview features. And then we have owners, which is me. You can add multiple owners to the application. So you might want other people to be able to manage these apps. Usually a team, not just you. You can add a group as well. And then let's go into the weeds. This is where you get the manifest, which is a JSON representation of your app. This is a JSON representation of your app, but it exposes a lot more information than just the basic stuff that we saw in the UI. Now, in an ideal world, we would have a scenario where everything that it's in the manifest, it's also exposed in the UI. We are working on that to make it more accessible. And there are ways to work with a manifest. You can edit it here. So for example, on line 4, I have the access token accepted version. By default, it's null, which means that it uses the V1 version of the tokens. We want usually 2. So if you change that there and save, that automatically updates that to provide version 2 tokens. There are other things in here that you still have to do manually, unfortunately. Now you might see some familiar stuff. Remember how we set up the permissions for, did we delete that one? Interesting. Did we not delete that expose an API? I want to go back. Oh no, it's still there. I did not delete that, so fine. So in the manifest, you can see that there, which is very similar to what we did in the UI. So that's a direct one-to-one support. You also see the reply URLs and what have you. Required users access. This is for accessing the graph. That's the graph GUID, and that's the scope, which is user.read. Super readable here, right? No. And then in here we have the resource app ID for the other API that we added, and this is its scope. It was like access as user, remember? So if you want to see what that looks like in the UI, if you go into the API permissions, these are the two things that we saw in the manifest. And then you also have some more advanced configurations. You can have SAML information, sign-in URL, which we don't have one. The sign-in audience, the Azure AD my org. And then there is a way to add roles. So you have app roles. So here, that's the big one. When you have to create custom roles for your applications, this is where it happens. So if we go Azure AD app registration roles. Create custom roles. This is not what I wanted. Role permissions. Custom roles for, no. So maybe we'll go up, registration, manifest, roles. So manifest, access token. App roles, there you go. So I can copy this one. I can come here. I can go into my roles, which is here. Those app roles, yep. But did I copy the whole thing? I think I copied the whole thing. So I will remove that and add this. And you can have allowed member types. It can be a user or an application. So you can either say these roles are for the user, or you can have roles that are specific to an application. And this is how you edit that information. I know it looks super ugly and it's prone to error. So there are two ways to interact with your app registrations. One is to do it here, which I don't think it's nice. Then you can use the graph, which it's a lot nicer. You can programmatically set these things either via the graph SDKs or through the Graph Explorer. But if you're doing it programmatically, you ideally want something in code that can run as part of your DevOps solution or your app registration deployment. And finally, we are working on exposing that information to the UI. In fact, we did a stream where we announced it initially, that it came out as a preview and everybody was super excited. We did a stream for an hour, and then within 4 hours, that feature was taken down because there were some implementation issues that we saw some bugs. So we're still waiting for that to come out. But for now, you have to use the manifest to add custom roles to your applications. And this will be propagated down to your tokens. So once you get an ID token, you can also have your roles in there. It will say what the user can do within the application and not just who they are, which is different to access tokens, right? Roles will allow you to configure what the user can do within the app that you're using. So this is something you can interact with. Unlike access tokens that your application needs to acquire and pass downstream to another API so that they can access that API. And then the API is responsible to use that information to tell what the user can or cannot do. So this is a quick tour. A couple of the things that we did not touch. So integration assistant, it is fantastic if you are using it. So here you come to, in effect, if things are not working, it will tell you what is happening. So let's say we have a web app, if I remember correctly, and yes, it is calling an API. You can say here, and then you can say evaluate my app registration. So as you can see here, configure redirect URI, we've done that. Ensure all redirect URIs use HTTPS scheme. Yes, they do. You can, in fact, use HTTP, but only for localhost and only for testing. You cannot use HTTPS outside your local environment. So you cannot use HTTP outside your local environment. Everything has to be HTTPS. Configure API permissions correct. If using the hybrid flow, enable ID tokens in the implicit grant flow. You know what? I am a little bit torn about that because first of all, there's no hybrid flow. There's implicit and auth code flow, and people will probably from the division will come and shoot me for this. And I would urge you to use the options when you configure your authentication in Microsoft Identity.web to say that you're going to use a code flow and not the implicit flow. So please don't use implicit flow. We're still debating about how we're going to message this. Now, what else do we have? Configure a valid credential. We don't have credentials. I think we removed them. So if I were to go back into my credentials, add the secret for now, done, and then come back to my integration assistant and run it again. Summary, edit. Can we do edit? Yeah. Cancel. Refresh. Okay, there you go. Refresh. Oh, there you go. So now that we have the secret, it's happy. See, I can go and fix one at a time. Use certificate credentials instead of a password credential. That's the recommended. That's what I said before, right? And then if you want single sign out, configure a logout URL. We had a whole session about single sign out with our friend Jan. So if you had a chance, go and catch the stream. Should be at the top over there. We talked about how you can do single sign out, which is very important. And if you are looking for single sign out, you need to have a redirect URL, a logout redirect URL. Okay. And assign users that should be able to view and edit the application registration as owners. We already have one. I am the one that did it. Discards configuration, no wildcards. If you're using authorization code flow, disable implicit grants, yes. And do not configure an app ID URL. Yeah, because we are not exposing in our client app an API. So there you have it. That was a tour of the app registrations. And on the next, on our next session, next Tuesday, we will be covering how to take this app registration, add it to your code. We saw a little bit in the beginning, but I did not run the app, so technically it doesn't count. And we'll use different apps. We can use a Node app, we can use a .NET client, maybe we'll do something with Blazor as well, and a console, just to show you how different implementations of this MSAL library happen across the board. And we'll have different app registrations for these, and we'll take it from there.